Okay, good morning. So where we were is that yesterday we had finished the two dots on Chav in the middle of Chav Beis by the widest lines, right at the top, the second to of the widest line. I'd like to start out from there today, maybe add on another thing that I mentioned I was going to say yesterday, and do that now. So if you recall the discussion that we had at the end of the day yesterday was about the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda holds that a Baal Keri is Mevarach L'fanei L'Acharei, which we thought maybe that meant he didn't hold the Tfilas Ezra. We ended up saying, no, he does hold the Tfilas Ezra. If he holds the Tfilas Ezra, then what's the reason he's saying that you can make a bracha before and afterwards? We said, just because he holds the Tfilah of Ezra doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the brachas. When it comes to brachas, could be he holds of here, or maybe that's what he means. And we said, well, he doesn't hold of here. So then we ended up saying was that even if he doesn't hold of here, what Rabbi Yehuda must be holding is he must be holding that there is a special din that you can say the brachas because brachas are considered sort of like Hilchos Derech Eretz. Hilchos Derech Eretz is not considered in the same level of learning like other areas of learning, and therefore we are more makil in that. That was the premise that we had concluded with yesterday. And then we ended up with a story. The story was that once Rabbi Yehuda was going, and Ma'aser Rabbi Yehuda Shirar Keri, and he was going by the river, and his Talmidim said to him, Rabbi, let's learn some Hilchos Derech Eretz. Why did the students say to him, Rabbi, let's learn some Hilchos Derech Eretz? Because they understood that since he's a Baal Keri, he's not going to be able to teach them regular learning. Because again, Rabbi Yehuda holds of what? Tfilas Ezra. but Hilchos Derech Eretz were more Mekel on. The thing I wanted to focus on over here is unbelievable. It's mind-boggling that Rabbi Yehuda is a Baal Keri, and the students know that he's a Baal Keri. So they tell him, let's learn Hilchos Derech Eretz. He says, okay, let's go to the mikvah. They said to him, why did you, bless you, why did you go to the mikvah? Bless you, do you in fact hold that Hilchos Derech Eretz is mutter? So he says, even though I'm Mekel, even though I'm Mekel when others come to ask me questions, Machmir and Latmi, and nevertheless I'm more Machmir on myself, and I do require a tefillah. What I'd like to point out is Gemara later on Samach Beis, a very famous Gemara. The Gemara tells us there are a few different stories, generational stories, that clearly each generation was teaching the next generation. Top of the Gemara on Samach Beis. The Gemara says, Tanya, Rabbi Kiva, Pam Achas Nachnas Ach Rabbi Shula Beis Akise. Rabbi Kiva says, I once went after Rabbi Shula to the bathroom and I learned three different things. And the Gemara says that Ben Azai responded to Rabbi Kiva when he heard about the three halachas. Amalei ben Azai, can I ask the Panacha Barabcha? Such a mechutza, if you went after your Rabbi Yeshua into the bathroom. He said, Tari V'luman Tzarech. Then we have the next Gemara. It says, Ben Azai, Pamachas Nachnasti, Achar Rabbi Kiva B'Sakite. Ben Azai says, one time I went, Ben Azai says, one time Rabbi Kiva went to the bathroom and I went in after him. I learned three halachas. And then the Gemara says that who responded to Ben Azai's actions? Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Adkane asked the Panecha Barabcha. Rabbi Yehuda himself said, "What? You're such a mechutza to go follow your Rebbe to go all the way into the bathroom." So what I would like to make the following is that clearly, what Rabbi Yehuda realized is that Ben Azai doing it to Rabbi Kiva doing it to Rabbi Yeshua, is that ultimately the Torah of Luman Anitzarech is something that everyone needs to understand. So that's presumably why he didn't hide it from the students to let them know that he's a Baal Keri and to explain to them that he's going to the mikvah with his makram on himself. To also point out, we're going to have this Gemara tomorrow. Chav Gimel Amaraf on the bottom of the Gemara. If you look on Chav Gimel, the bottom of the wide lines. So the Gemara says there, Amar Rabbi Barchana ki Avazlina Basid Rabbi Yochanan ki Avim Ma'al Beis Hakisei. You have an example. Rabbi Barchana is following Rabbi Yochanan as he's going to the bathroom, and he sees that he's taking this firm Dagarit or whatever. We'll get to that. But again, the idea of Torah Hiv meant even doing things that might seem somewhat less savory, somewhat less normative. Nevertheless, they did not restrain themselves from doing so. And we're going to see a number of examples today as well. All right, so that's where I wanted to start with is the two dots. Tanya, where the two dots, the wide lines on Chav Beis, Rabbi Huda ben ain't Divrei Torah Mekabel Tumah. Rabbi Huda ben Meseira says Divrei Torah are not Mekabel Tumah. What does that mean? That means that Divrei Torah don't become tummy. That means that if somebody had a mission, they are nevertheless still able to study Torah because Divrei Torah are not Mekabel Tumah. Says the Gemara, there was a story of a student who was in the middle of learning, but he was making mistakes, like deliberately so. Why? Because he didn't want to just be learning. Because remember all the different sheets that we had yesterday that talked about, well, is it mutter for Gemara? Is it mutter for Mishnah? Is it mutter for this? Each one. So Rabbi Huda was saying, in Divrei Torah Mekabel Tumah, meaning everything is mutter, nothing is aser. So when this Talmud was Megam game, Rabbi Huda was understood the reason he's reading it so awkwardly was because he was uncomfortable, because he's a Baal Kari. So Amalei B'nei Psach Picha V'Ya'iru Devarecha. He says to him, open your mouth. Now, I want to point out that Psach Pich over here means open your mouth to study Torah. We have the same type of Lashon, Psach Pich, the Marna Vadazar Yishches, tells him the story of Chanan ben Shana was getting killed. So they said to him, Rebbe, right, the famous story where he says, he sees Isis Parchas, he sees the letters flying into the sky. So over there, the Klatz Tanur jumps in after this kind of amazing vision, and even he kills himself, and he also gets to heaven. But the student said to him, Rebbe, Psach Picha, open your mouth and let the fire come in so you should die faster. And he says, no, I don't want to mechav. I don't want to open my mouth because I do not want to enhance or increase or make more fast my death. Over here was the opposite. Over here was saying, Psach Micha, open your mouth in order to be able to study Torah to increase your life. So Rabbi Huda says to him, no problem, open your mouth and recite your words correctly. She'ein divrei Torah mekabel tumah. Shneimar, what's the proof that Rabbi Huda has that he could be opening his mouth? Shneimar, haloi koi devari keish numa Hashem pasuk in Yirmiyah. Hashem is saying, as it the Navi is saying, as it were, about the words of Hashem. Koi devari keish, isn't his words like fire? Says God. God is, as the word saying, that aren't my words like fire. Ma'esh ena mekabel tumah. After returning mekabel tumah, just like fire is not mekabel tumah, so too Torah is not mekabel tumah. And by the way, the end of that pasuk is uchepate shefayte sela. Right, that's the end of the pasuk there, which we have been discussing. For those who have been attending on Sunday, you know all the different things that we learn from that. The Gemara Shabbos, the Gemara Sanhedrin Lamed Daled, etc., etc. Okay. This is the beginning of that pasuk, and what we're seeing is that there's a comparison between fire and Torah, and we know fire is not mekabel tumah, so Torah is not mekabel tumah, and therefore it is permitted to recite the Torah, to learn Torah, no matter what part of Torah, even if one is a Baal Kari. Says the Gemara, Amar Mar, Matzias HaMishnah, Ve'ena Matzias HaGemara. What do you mean Matzias HaMishnah? We can expound on the Mishnah, not the Gemara. That was a Shita before, Ben Yosef. So the Gemara is bringing that down now as the normative Shita, right? So Amar Mar, Matzias HaMishnah, Matzias HaGemara. We learned that somebody can expound on the Mishnah, but not the Talmud. Misayeh Leila Rabbi Eloi. This is a right to Rabbi Eloi. Who's Rabbi Eloi? Don't get confused. This Rabbi Eloi had to be an Amir. How do I know? That it had to be an Amar. De Amar Rabbi Eloi. Amar Rabbi Achabar Yaakov Mishum Rabbeinu. Right? Because Rabbi Eloi here is quoting Rabbi Achabar Yaakov, who's saying in the name of Rabbeinu. Who is Rabbeinu? Look at Rashi over here. Rashi says, who's Rabbeinu? Rabbeinu is Rav. Later on, it's a little bit of a game that is fun to play. Maybe not so fun to play, but whatever. Maybe interesting people find it fun to play. In any event, it's fun enough. Because if you look throughout Brachos, you see this Mishum Rabbeinu a number of times. And sometimes Rashi says Rav, and sometimes Rashi doesn't say Rav. I think it's very interesting because of the fact that you will see, as we will get to later on, that there are going to be a couple of places where it was for sure not Rav. So we're going to see later on the Gemara in Brachos on Lamed Ches, on Beis is going to say Mishum Rav, and over there it's talking not about Rav. When it says Mishum Rabbeinu, it has to be talking about potentially Shmuel as well. But you'll see, why does Rashi sometimes explain it? Why does Rashi sometimes not explain Mishum Rabbeinu? This is something you'll see a number of times in the next 20 blot or so. We'll come up with it a couple of times. And anyway, over here, Rashi explains that we're talking about Rav. So this Rabbi Lloyd must have been an Amira. Remember that because Rabbi Lloyd generally is understood as the Tana. In fact, Rabbi Huda, who we generally mention here in the Mishnah, this Rabbi Huda is Rabbi Huda Bar Eloi. We look at Lushan Mem. Talk about Rabbi Lloyd the Tana. Rabbi Loi is the Tana appears on this page and appears as an Amar on this page. Appears the Amar. Says the more as follows. So what did he say? What did Rav say? Halacha matzias ha-mishnah v'ena matzias ha-gemara. They said in the name of Rav that you're able to learn the Mishnah, not the Gemara, which would sound like a B'nai and Min Yosef, the same exact shita. Says the Gemara, Kitanai, right? This would obviously be a dispute with who? Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira. Because Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira says, "Ein different type of Kabbalah Tum," but that means to say that all type of study of Torah is going to be permissible, to just not limited to just the Mishnah as opposed to the Gemara. Says the Gemara, Kitanoi, this must be a dispute among the Tanoim. What's the dispute among the Tanoim? As follows. Matzias HaMishnah and Matzias HaGemara. Different Rabbi Meir holds that you're able to expand on the Mishnah, but not the Talmud. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel says the name of Chanina ben Gamliel, Zev is there, Aser. Both expounding on the Mishnah and on the Talmud is Aser. The Amilay, Zev is there, Mutter. And there are those that say, no, it's Mutter, both the Mishnah and the Talmud. Of course, if you're going to say that it's Mutter, the Mishnah and the Talmud, who's that going to be going like? It's going to be going like Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira. Says the more like this. Man, the Amar Zev is there, Aser. Those that say that Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel, the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, are saying that both Mishnah and Gemara are Asur. That's Rabbi Yochanan Sandler. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan Sandler had two versions of what Rabbi Yochanan Sandler is saying. Either Rabbi Yochanan Sandler is saying, Li Kanis Medrash, Kol Iker, that you couldn't expound in Drash on Torah, but then there was a much more prohibitive version of what Rabbi Yochanan Sandler was saying, which was Li Kanis Lebeis HaMedrash Kol Iker. You can't even walk into the base HaMedrash. In any event, according to those that say Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel is saying Zev Zeh Aser, that means they're holding like this more stringent understanding of Rabbi Yochanan Sandler, which is you can't even go into the base of Medrash. The ones who say that no, Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Rabbi Gamliel, etc., they hold that it's totally mutter. What does that mean? Because they hold like Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, which means that by definition, all study of Torah, Mishnah, Gemara, Halachas, Agaritas, Sukkim, Tanakh, all of it is mutter. Why? Because ain't divrei Torah mekabel tumam. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Nohug halma kehane tzla sabi. This is a key point in this Gemara. This is the most important line in this Gemara. And the takeaway line is this line right here. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Nohug alma kahari tzla sabi. The world is naig like these three old men, like these three sabas. What do you mean? Here, Rabbi Loi, Beresh Lagez, like Rabbi Loi, when it comes to Beresh Lagez, this Rabbi Loi would be a Tana. Here, Rabbi Yishai B'Kalayim, like Rabbi Yishai when it comes to Kalayim. Here, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira B'Divrei Torah. Like Yehuda ben Meseira when it comes to Divrei Torah. What do we mean? I mean as follows. Here, Rabbi Loi, Beresh Lagez. When do we hold like Rabbi Loi when it comes to Beresh Lagez? The Tanya, Rabbi Loi Omer, because we learned Rabbi Loi said as follows. Beresh Lagez and a Noik Ela Ba'aretz. The first year, and it goes to the Kayan, is only noeg in Eretz Yisrael, not a chutz la'aretz. Here, Rabbi Yishai b'Kalayim. What do you mean we hold like Rabbi Yishai when it comes to Kalayim? Here, the civil says Kalayim. You're not allowed to plant Kalayim, right? And what is Rabbi Yishai telling us? Rabbi Yishai, you're not chayiv on Kalayim when you are taking until you're taking like the grape seed and the chita and the soira, and then sort of planting them at the same time. So this is the word of Rabbi Shai. We in all of these three cases of being mekel, as Rashi points out, right? In the Reish Lagez, not being knowing in Chutz La'aretz is being mekel on people's money. Rabbi Shai is saying that you're not chayim and kalayim until you take these three seeds and do man pelas yad. Meaning, if you didn't do that, then you're not chayim and kalayim. When it comes to the Divrei Torah, the Tanya, as we learn in the Brisa, so we're bringing this down to get across the basic fundamental point, which is that Yehuda ben Meseira Shita is the halacha. Divrei Torah not makabel tumah. What is the question that you have? We have Tfilas Ezra. Tfilas Ezra is what? Mitaken by who? Ezra. Ezra Sefer, that's like the beginning of the Second Temple period. Yehuda ben Meseira lived during the Second Temple. Abner lived during the Second Temple, and many proofs of it. For example, we have the Gemara Pesachim Tamavav, when the Hillel comes back and he's debating with the Bnei Beseira about what the halacha was on Erev Shabbos Shechal Yaseh Pesach, right after Shechlik Pesach, and it's Shabbos I'm not sure what I just said, but Erev Pesach Shechal Yes b'Shabbos. I may have said the opposite. When Shabbos, which is Erev Pesach, what do you do? How do you shech? So the Bnei B'Sher didn't know. We have the Gemara in the very beginning of Beis and Pesachim tells the Rebbe there about even though he was far away, he was able to get them to punish somebody who was not appropriate, a guy coming to try to eat from the carbon Pesach. So he lived, obviously, he was from the earliest of the Tanoim. He's later, Bashai is later. In any event, however earlier Yehuda ben Sarah was, how is he coming along and knocking off the Takon of Ezra? How's that possible? How does that work? Normally we say the Gemara Megillah Beis tells us that you can only knock off a gezerah from an earlier base than if you're greater than them, from a minion. But Yehuda ben Sarah, as great as he was, how could he do that? So that is a question we're going to have to come along to answer. May as well answer it now. May as well answer now. All right, so we'll just tell you. I'll talk quickly what Rabbeinu Yonah says. Rabbeinu Yonah tells us here. Rabbeinu Yonah tells us it's on Yud Gimel and Beis in the top area. Rabbeinu Yonah tells us as follows: the bottom of the Rabbeinu Yonah on Yud Gimel and Beis top area. So the Rabbeinu Yonah gives two possible answers. One is he says the Isdam Nesha Rosh Hayuchal Tzibur Lamidba. It's a takana that Ein Yichal Tzibur Lamidba. The Tzibur couldn't manage this. It was too hard. It was too hard. So when it's too hard, you cancel. But he doesn't like that one. Says Rabbeinu Yonah a second answer. A better answer. Says Rabbeinu, what's the better answer? That this Gzer of Ezra was never mispashed by all of Klal Yisrael. The Takana never went everywhere. Since the Takana never went and never was adopted fully by all of Klal Yisrael, it is therefore able to be rejected. Those are the two possible reasons of the Rabbeinu Yonah. He likes the second one. He doesn't like the idea that the tzibur wasn't Yechon Lamed. But if you look in the Ritva, if you look in the Ritva doesn't have a problem with it. The Ritva says he gives the same answer. The first answer he gives the Kana Leipash the B'chol Yisrael, but his second answer is Inami the time of Nesha Ha'isa Takana She'ein Revet Tzibur Yechon Lamed Ba. V'Hohava Bittul Torah Bittul Mipnei Tikkun Olam, and it calls Bittul Torah, and therefore they were mevatel because of Tikkun Olam. Right? In order to help out the Jewish people, they were mevatel. So the Ritva doesn't seem to have a problem with this fact they were mevatel the Takana. I just want to point out that the halacha l'maisa, if you look in Archaim Peiches, so we say as follows: that any tamei is able to study Torah, Kriyashmat, davening, no problem. Chutz in Valkari, sheitziu Ezra miklat meim. Valkari was treated differently because of Ezra. V'ashu bein b'divrei Torah bein b'kriyashma v'tfila ad sheyitbo k'dei shleyu talmidei chacham etzum eshel neshasem ketar negalim. And the reason for this, that they ushered up the Valkari from learning, from Shema, from davening, until they were toivel, was so that they shouldn't be so much hanging around their wives. They should think twice, because otherwise they're going to have to go to the mikvah. Later on, they will mevatel the takana. The black letter law brought down in Shulchan Aruch is, and this is the halacha l'maisa, what the halacha is, regardless of how certain groups of from people nevertheless still want to make sure they go to the mikveh every single day. Nevertheless, that is absolutely not the black letter law. The black letter law in halacha is that we don't have the Tfilas Ezra anymore, and it was entirely batal, whether it regards to Shema, whether it regards to Shemon Esrei, whether it regards to Divrei Torah. Totally batal. Okay, now this, going back to the Gemara. So we're right now is in the wide lines. In the wide line, we are by Ki'as Ze'iri. Yeah? Ki'as Ze'iri. So says the Gemara, Ki'as Ze'iri, when Ze'iri came, where does Ze'iri come? Ze'iri came presumably to, he either came to Eretz Yisrael or to Bavel. So the Gemara is saying, Ki'as Ze'iri, when Ze'iri came to, presumably in this case it means that he came to Bavel. Amar Batlu L'Tfilusa. He says they were Mavatal the Tfilah. Others say no. What he said was they were battled to the Netila. So Manda Amar Batlu L'Tfilusa those that said that it was mevatel on tefillah, Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, meaning that they were mevatel tefillas Ezra. Why? Because they're like Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, that you don't need to have any tefillah at all. Man batul and filusta. Those that say that when Zira was talking about nothing to do with our topic, but rather you was the bittul was on the fact that they required in tefillas Yadayim. It's Yihad Rav Chizda light amad the mahara amay beidan slusa. This is like Rav Chizda who would curse those that when it was time for davening will go running around looking for water. If you look back at the Gemara in Tetzvav for a moment, if you remember, that wasn't exactly the fullness of what Rabbi Chizda said. Rabbi Chizda said, he would curse those that would run around for water at the time of davening, but he qualified that. He said a little bit more than that. What was the lashon? He said, "V'hani mila l'kriyashma, avol tefila mahader." That was with regards to kriyashma, but for Shemona Esrei, you should try to find water to wash your hands. But he further qualified that by saying, "V'ad kama." How far do you have to go to find water to wash your hands for Shemona Esrei? Ad parsa. What is a parsa? It's a certain measure of distance. But he said that's v'hanimil kameh. That's only in front of you. In other words, if you're going in a certain direction, you should try to see if you can get some water ad parsa. But he said, but going backwards to get water to daven, you don't have to go back a mil, which is 4 mil, make a parsa. You don't have to do that. But the Gemara qualified that, and the Gemara said, however, we know milhu de'en a pachos min mil chayzer, but you would go back for less than a mil, even backwards. So even though Rav Chizda is saying that you are mevatel than a tila, and he would curse those that would go running around for it, he's only cursing those that are going around too much, meaning less. If going backward direction, less than a mil, you go back, and forward direction, you go up to a parsa. That Rav Chizda agrees with. Okay, but clearly the basic idea was those they're so makbid on finding and Tzias Yadayim to be able to daven that they're forgetting to daven on time. That the davening on time is very important as well. Okay, continues the Gemara. Either way, that wouldn't be relevant to our topic now. So we're not 100% sure what Ziri was coming to tell us. Either Ziri was coming to tell us like a Rudman Seira, and they were mevatel the Tvila, or Rudman Seira is not relevant to what Ziri is saying. He's just saying that the mevatel, the requirement for doing Tzias Yadayim, which would be relevant to our sugi, would be relevant to the sugi back on Tezvav. Okay. I wanted to point out a lashon here in the Ritva. The Ritva is a lashon that he makes a whole drasha about it, but it's not really relevant for us because we don't have that in the Gemara. But listen to the lashon of the Ritva. It says the Ritva, Mashma mehaka, the Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, afilu nesina as tisha kabin loy matra. As we're going to see, it's going to come up in a minute. The idea of tisha kabin. Tisha kabin, 9 kav of water being poured on somebody is different than going into a mikveh with his 40 saw. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira, he says that divrei Torah not mikabel tuma. You're able to study Torah without going to the mikveh at all. So does that mean that you have to get Tisha Kabin or not? Not clear from the Gemara. Gemara never mentions anything Rabbi Yehuda say about Tisha Kabin at all. Says the Ritva, it seems clear that Rabbi Yehuda holds that you don't even have to have Tisha Kabin. Ein divrei Torah mikabel tum means you don't have to have Tvila, and you don't have to have Tisha Kabin. You don't have to have anything. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to get to it in a minute. So the Amar Rav Nachman lekaman nog alma klas sabik Rabbi Yehuda b'Meseira. Then the Gemara is going to mention that Rav Nachman Yitzchak says that the world is noyeg like the 3 older rabbis, like Rabbi Yehuda b'Meseira b'Tfila. That when the Gemara says that they hold like Rabbi Yehuda b'Meseira when it comes to Tfila, lav dafka b'Tfilahu adid l'nesinas tisakabin. It doesn't just mean Tfila. That we hold by tefillah, you don't require tefillah. It means that you don't even require tisha kabin either. But again, look at our Gemara carefully now. What did our Gemara say by Hanatosha Sabi? These 3 old rabbis. It says, what are the 3 old rabbis? Rabbi Yehuda Seira b'divrei Torah. So in our version of the Gemara, it doesn't say b'tefillah. So in other words, this Ritva doesn't really get started. And his understanding is based upon his Gemara, where it says Rabbi Yehuda Seira b'tefillah. So he wants to say, Rabbi Yehuda Meseira is mater you to study Torah, not only that you don't have to do tefillah, but you don't even have to do Tisha Kabin. But in our version of the Gemara, where it says, Rabbi Yehuda Meseira b'divrei Torah, so we hold like a Buddha says that when it comes to learning, that you don't even have to be toivel and you don't have to do shikam, you don't have to do anything when it comes to Torah. It doesn't mention the word tefillah, so you wouldn't necessarily have to make the same diak as the Ritva does. Okay, now we have a new Gemara that's connected to the previous one, and is going to discuss this idea of Tisha Kabin, among other things. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught. What did they teach? Balkari Shanasan love Tisha Kabin, Mayim Mutar. A Balkari puts on himself test cabin of water is tar. What does that mean? He put on himself test cabin of water. Test cabin of water, and whether that can work for a shower is discussed in halacha. Today most hold, that a shower is equivalent to Tisha Kabin. You stay in the shower for a couple of minutes. Again, don't tell me, but I have a special ESG type of shower head, and my shower head is water saver. It comes out a drip, like in California. I once had a shower in a hotel, and it was like, this is a shower? We're in America. Hashem Yirakim. But a normal shower head that has a regular drip, a few minutes in that would be considered Tisha Kabin. And therefore, according to most poskim, for somebody wanted, again, it's not being required, but if somebody had a shower, that could be equivalent to Tisha Kabin if they stood in the shower and let the water come in sort of a one stream. Okay, now we're going to explain. Says the rabbis thought that somebody who's about carry who was putting on himself Tisha Kabin is tar. Now, what does this do? For Rabbi Yehuda say, let's forget about it for the moment, because he holds that you don't need Tisha Kabin on tefillah. But for those who held that you do require something, we thought that something was tefillah, and now we're saying that something could be Tisha Kabin, which would be significantly easier, right? Especially nowadays, you don't have to go to a mikveh; you go to your shower. In those days, maybe a mikveh was obviously difficult, but the Tisha Kabin, maybe you could do it in your house also. I'm not 100% sure that that was necessarily available to each and every person. As we'll see in the Gemara, there seem to have been jugs that they would made, or Nach made a jug that was Tisha Kabin that he would use to pour on the students before they would come to shul. So he had such a jug. I guess it was big enough that you're able to hold it and pour it, etc. So maybe people had that, and maybe that would be easier. So what we're saying now is that it will be significantly more megal on a person who's about carry that doesn't have to go to get a tefillah. He could just go and get Tisha Kabin. Nachem Ish, everyone knows who that is. Nachem Ish Gamzu, right? Why is it Nachem Ish Gamzu? Why is it called that? Because he says Gamzu l'Teva. All right. So Nachem Ish Gamzu, Lachashal Rabbi Kiva. He was a Rabbi Kiva, and he whispered it to Rabbi Kiva that Tisha Kabin is sufficient for Balkari. Rabbi Kiva, Lachashal Ben Azai, and Rabbi Kiva whispered it to Ben Azai. Remember, Ben Azai was a bit of a student of Rabbi Kiva, and maybe his son-in-law as well. Fine. Ben Azai. And Menazir went out and spoke about it in the shuk. He spoke about it publicly in the market. It's fascinating to me that Ben Azai went out and spoke about this publicly in the market, because Ben Azai is also the famous one who says, the Gemara tells in Yevamah Samach Gimel, that if a person who's not engaged in Peri V'Rivya is mamish, like he's shayfich domim. It's like he's memayit the mus. So they asked them, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah asked him in the Gemara there, he says, really? And what about you? He says, well, I can't get married. That's the Gemara in Ksubas, he couldn't get married. Right? She waited for him for many years. Like her mother had waited for Rabbi Akiva, she waited for him, but he wouldn't marry, or maybe married, divorced, whatever it is. Anyhow, it says the Gemara, so Ben Azai publicized the idea that you could go and do Tisha Kabin. You don't need to have a tefillah. There were two rabbis in the West, two rabbis in Eretz Yisrael who argued about this. Rabbi Yossi bar Rav and Rabbi Yossi bar Zvido. What do they argue about? One said no. Ben Azai whispered it in public. He didn't say it out loud. And one said he said it out loud in public. What's the difference? Says the Gemara like this: Man Tana Shana Misham Bittul Torah Misham Bittul Perivya. Those who said that he said it publicly, that he made it very clear that you do not need to do a tefillah after having a mission, that you could just simply do Tisha Kabin. Why did he do that? Because of Bittul Torah, because people were not learning until they got to the mikvah, and because people weren't engaged in Purivu, because they didn't want to have to go and run to a mikvah in order to be able to learn. So that's why he said it out loud, so everybody should be able to engage in Purivu normally, and everybody should be able to learn Torah normally. Uman, Tani Lachashan, those who say he whispered it, Shelo, you tell me them. Because they didn't want the Talmid Chacham to be running around and hanging around at home too much. So therefore, then he would have only whispered to let people know about the het, but not publicized it. In any event, what this is clear is that according to these mandarim, which sounds like including Rabbi Akiva, it is required to do something. Maybe it doesn't require a tefillah, but it requires at least Tisha Kabin. It says the Rabbi Yani says, I heard that they were making this, I heard they were machmin this. What does it mean? They're machmin that they went to Mem Saw. And I heard that there are people who are making it do Tisha Kabin. But anybody who's machmin on himself, he's zerkat a long life. Rabbi Shubin Levi. Rabbi Shubin Levi says, "Mativan shel tovel shachar." And Rabbi Shubin Levi says, "What is the nature of the people who are tovel by shachars?" Says them, "My tivan. What are you talking about? What does Rabbi Shubin Levi mean? Mativan. What's the nature of those who are tovel by shachars? Ha iu the Omar Balkari Asar B'Devar. He's the one. He is the one." Who we've been basing him on this whole idea that about carry is usher. Yes, we know it's Tzvias Ezra. He's the one who showed you the smach and the psukim that juxtaposed the very Torah to Maimon Sinai. Just like by Maimon Sinai, you couldn't have about carry. So too by learning, you couldn't have about carry. So the Gemara said, "What do you mean when you say what's the nature of these people? You're the one who have said it was usher." Says the Gemara, "What is the nature of this arbaim saw that you are requiring?" The Baal Keri, that he has to go retire himself in a mikvah. After B'tisha Kabin, it was possible to do it. Yes, it's usher, but it's not usher until you table. It's usher until you put upon yourself 9 kabin of water. Mativam b'tzvila after b'nesina. Why do you have to go and to be table yourself? Go be pouring on yourself the water. So Amar Chanina. So remember, this is all not going to be Masera. Right? According to the Ritva learns, according to where our understanding of Uddam Masera is what? That when somebody's about carry, he doesn't need tefillah. He doesn't need Tisha Kabin. This is going in a different stream that says that there was a tefillah, or maybe a Tisha Kabin. Right? The tefillah to Ezra. I'm not sure that you can make the argument here that Tisha Kabin came with the initial takana of Ezra. I don't think you could say that. Maybe it changed into Tisha Kabin. In any event, neither of this is going contrary to Uddam Masera holds that none of this is required, that Divrei Torah not Makabel Tumah. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Chanina says that they made a big gutter over here. They made a big fence, a big barrier. What's it mean? This idea of requiring a tefillah is a big barrier. A barrier for who? The Tanya we have Ma'aseh Be'echad Shetavi Ishol Dvar Avera. It was a man who wanted to go after and do an inappropriate activity. Rashi says with Isha Pnuya. So the woman said to him, Reka, you empty man. Do you have 40 sot to do tefillah before you go back to learn? Miyad pirish. So then he stopped. So I find the story again amazing. Notice how the Gemara says Ma'aseh Be'echad, Ma'aseh B'chassan, Ma'aseh different type of Ma'aseh. We're talking about an echad. What kind of echad are we talking about? We're talking about somebody here who was a Talmid Chacham or Tzluvim Merabban, somebody who obviously was interested in learning and cared about it enough that he wouldn't go back to learn until he did a tefillah. Nevertheless, he was still engaged in a situation with Tevei Anisha. Unbelievable Gemara. Nevertheless, Amrlahu Rav Huna l'Rabbanan, Rabbi Isai, Mibnei Ma'atem Mizalzim l'Tfilah Zu. Rav Huna said to the rabbis, Rabbi Isai, why are you guys Mizalzim l'Tfilah? You're not doing it. Imisham Tzina, if it's because it's too cold the water, after Mechatzos, so go to the bathhouse and do the Tfilah over there. Amalei Rav Chizda, V'chiyashil b'chamin. Rav Chizda asked him, are you able to be toivel in hot water? Again, I don't want to get into now the whether or not Sfardim, Ashkenazim, putting in the water. Not our topic. For our purposes now, let's assume that you're not supposed to be toivel b'chamin. Amalei Rav Ada bar Ahava koy kavasech. Rav Ada bar Ahava, Rav Huna said to him, Rav Ada bar Ahava holds like you. Think back to the Gemara on Hamlet base when Rav Huna wasn't paying his worker appropriately. So I said to you in the Gemara, is Rav Ada bar Ahava the one who was being a little mincing around to say the words? Maybe it's mashma, not Rav Ada bar Ahava. Why? Because Rav Ada bar Ahava is being. I gave different examples, but one of the examples is here. Is that Rav Ada bar Ahava is being cited by Rav Huna? Would Rav Ada bar Ahava then have to mince his words and say, maybe lying married by myself? See if you he's being used as a source for Rav Huna. In any event, says the Gemara, so Rav Huna is telling Rav Chizda, you're right. There are those who say you can't be toivel and chamen like Rav Ada bar Ahava, but I feel like you could, and therefore the tefillah shouldn't be so scary. Like, I have to go to the freezing mikveh. I have to go to Rizal mikveh. Imagine the Balkir has to go to Rizal mikveh every time. Like, oh my gosh, too cold. But if you knew that the mikveh was nice and warm, very nice. I'm not getting into that. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Zera Havi Yosef be'agna demaya. Rabbi Zera was sitting in the middle of the bath. He was sitting in the bathhouse in a bath. Omar Leila Shame, he says to the Shame, Zilvais, Letisha Kabin Mishadi Eluya. He says, go bring me 9 kabin and pour it on me. So number one, a couple of things. Reb Zera is in a bathhouse. Number two, Reb Zera has a shamash with him in the bathhouse. Number three, he's telling the shamash he's a bal carry. Number four, he's telling the shamash, pour on me 9 cabin because I want to be able to be yaitz and to be able to go and study again. So you see what? Number one, that the test cabin works for those that are machmir to do something after they see an emission. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Lama le'lamar kulei hai. So Rav Chia bar Abba says to Rav Zera, so amazingly, he's there in the bathhouse also, and they're schmoozing about what they should do because Rav Zera is about carry. So Rav Chia bar Abba says to him, Lama le'lamar kulei hai. Why do you need this? V'hayaseh b'gavayu. Right, the situation is you're sitting there in the tub. I'm not exactly sure what they do in the bathhouse, but you're sitting in something. You have enough water, so you just be toivel in that. Why do you have to have somebody, the shamash, come and pour on you the test cabin? I'm going to care barim saw. So they respond to him. It's like that barim saw. Ma barim saw mitzvah of loy minasina. Just like when it comes to a mikvah, when it comes to barim saw, you can't just like go to the mikvah in a manner where you're going to take the water from the mikvah, pour it on you. You have to be toivel in the mikvah. Doesn't work when Nesina. After Shekabim, Nesina v'lo b'tfila. When you sit in a bath, that bath is not a mikvah, right? So that bath is only able to do for you Tisha Kabin because it's a 9 cabin of water. But 9 cabin only works if it's poured on you. 9 cabin doesn't work if you go and be toivel in it. You're sitting in it. So that's why he said, I need the shamash to come pour it on me. So now we're on halacha of chumrah on Tisha Kabin. Tisha Kabin is not able to be tefillah. Tisha Kabin is only benasina. Memsa is only betfillah and not benasina. Says the Gemara. Rav Nachman tiken chatzva bas Tisha Kabin. Like I mentioned already before, Rav Nachman created a jug that was 9 cabin big. Ki asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, he said, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Huda Glustera, he said, Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Huda Glustera said, when is it required to the situation of the 9 cabin? Is only Chaylul Einza. Chaylul Einza means, and Rashi says over here, that every time Chacham is considered a Chayla, right? Because Tashish Kaychan, like Mar Yuma tells, is very, very tired. They learn so much. So somebody who's a Chayla, La'aitza, he's able to get Tisha Kabin. We're making on him. Have a Chayla Hamargil, but somebody who's a Chayla, but he was engaged in Tashmish or things of that sort, then Arbam Sa. Then Rabbi Kiva holds Arbam Sa. So now, this is very interesting because we just said that we just whispered that according to Rabbi Akiva, Tisha Kabin was fine. Now we're saying that maybe there's a difference between a Chayla La'aitza or a Chayla Hamargil. That was something we're going to have to see some more. Rabbi Yosef, Itbar Chatzved Rav Nachman. Rabbi Yosef said, let's break the jug of Rav Nachman. Why? Because the jug of Rav Nachman, of 9 cabin that he would pour on the students when they come to the yeshiva, so that's not going to work because they're not Chayla La'aitza. They're all going to be considered quote unquote Chayla the Hamargil, so therefore it won't work. They would need Memsa. They wouldn't be able to work with 9 cabin. Kiyasa Ravin, when Ravin came, Amar Be'usha. Now the side of the Gemara, the Aruch changes it Be'isha, which makes sense. Not Isha as a woman, but another place, because the Usha is in Bavel, and it wouldn't make sense to say Kiyasa Rav. Right? If he's saying Kiyasa Rav Dimi, he's bringing you something from Eretz Yisrael. Then he's saying Kiyasa Ravin, he's bringing you something from Eretz Yisrael. Right? Remember, those are 2 of the 4 names that are always traveling. On this probably also is the Erie. So in any event, when it says Ki Asa Rav and Be'usha, it wouldn't make sense. So you wouldn't be coming from Eretz Yisrael telling you in Bavel what happened in Usha, which is in Bavel. So obviously you have to change the gears like the Arf does. So Ki Asa Rav and Amar Be'usha, there was a mice like this in Usha. What happened in its place, Isha, wherever it was? Be'ki'ila de Rav Aishia, on the porch of Rav Aishia. What happened on the porch of Rav Aishia? Asu v'shalu le Rav Asi. They asked this question to Rav Asi, what's the halacha about somebody who is about carry? Amalu lo yishon el chayla hamargil. What is the halacha? The halacha is only by a chayla hamargil are we going to require, according to Rav Asi, test cabin. Aval chayla einze pater miklum, but a chayla einze is totally pater. So different. Rav Dimi, when he came, Rav Dimi said that a chayla hamargil is memsa and a chayla einze is test cabin. But Rav Dimi, when he's coming, Ravin, when he's coming, he's having a different shita. Is Potter. Rav Yosef, it's time in Chatvid Rav Nachman. Rav Yosef adds. Rav Yosef says, now we can reboot. We can glue together back the jug of Rav Nachman. Why can we glue back together the jug of Rav Nachman? Because now we're in a situation where it'll be needed again. Because according to the way he's learning, a regular Chayla Margel only needs test cap. It doesn't need Memsa, so then you could use it again. Says the Gemara, Michli, Kula Amar Tanai B'de Ezra Kamifli. All these rabbis, all these shittas, everybody's arguing what the Takan of Ezra was. So what was the Takan of Ezra? V'nachzi Ezra Heichati, which is he. What was the Takan of Ezra? Amar Rabbi Ezra Tikin Lebari Amargel Mem Sa Bari Loitzer Tes Kabin. Rabbi says Ezra's Takan was a Bari Amargel. Forget the Chayil Amargel. A Bari Amargel, meaning somebody who's a regular Balkari. He has to do mem, so he has to go to the mikvah. Bari Loitzer, but somebody who's a regular, normal person who had a nocturnal ambition, such a person to test carbon. The Asamara Pligi, and then the Maram come along and are disputing. B'chayla, what's the story by a chayla? Marsa v'chayla amargo kibari amargo. There are those that say that a chayla amargo is like a bari amargo. That is to say that they're going to hold that a chayla amargo needs memsa and a chayla and a sorry, so Marsa v'chayla amargo kibari amargo. There are those that say that a chayla amargo require memsa just like a bari amargo. The chayla ain't kibari lines and a chayla ain't is going to be like a bari line. A chayla ain't is going to require test carbon just like a bari line say. And there are those that say no. A chayla hamargel is like a bari line, so a chayla hamargel will only require test carbon, and a chayla line is part of mikulam, and a chayla line is going to be entirely parted. There are those that want to say this as the shittas. Rava disagrees. In practical intents and purposes, Rav and Abai say exactly the same thing, but the difference is in what is the Takanas Ezra and what do the rabbis add. Amar Rava, Nehei the Tikkun Ezra Tefillah Nesina Mitiken. Rava says it can't be correct. That Ezra was metakin Tefillas Ezra. Was Ezra metakin anything about Tes Kabin? He must not have. According to Abaya, he was metakin. Part of Tefillas Ezra was Tes Kabin. Part of the Takana of Ezra was the Tes Kabin. According to Rava, that's not true. The only part of the Takana of Ezra was the Memsa, was never Tes Kabin. So according to the Rava wants to learn, like I said, for all practical intents, there's no difference. But the question was whether it was part of Ezra's original takana or not. So Amar Rava nehated taken Ezra tefillah and Nesina mitaken. Rava says that yes, Ezra was mitaken tefillah, but he was mitaken Nesina. No, he was not. He was not mitaken tes kabin. V'Amar Mar Ezra taken tefillah balakari, and Ezra was mitaken the tefillah for balkari. So what then are you going to say? He cannot say that it was tes kabin part of his takana. Elamar Rava Ezra taken tefillah lebari hamargel memsa. Ezra was talking just the tefillah for a bari hamargel memsa, a regular bari who sees a mission, he has memsa. And the rabbis came along and they said that a bari la'ansai, somebody who's a regular bari had an inus, so he has to do tes kabin. So it's a rabbinic addition to the tefillas Ezra. It's not part of the tefillas Ezra. And then the rabbis came along and had a big dispute by a situation of a chayla. There are those who say that a situation of a chayla margel is just like a bari margel, that they require memsa of a chayla into kiburla, and a chayla is tes kabin just like a bari inside. Marsavar and the other opinions hold that bari hamargel memsa, that bari hamargel they require memsa, but a chayla margel kabari la'insa tes kabin, but a chayla margel is going to be considered like a bari la'insa and it will require tes kabin. But somebody who's an absolute chayla la'insa will be pater miklum, will be totally pater. So it ends up in a situation where Abai and Rava end up saying exactly the same thing, but the only question is, was it part of the Takanas Ezra or was it an addition of the rabbis? Just to conclude, last lines is before the two dots is Amar Rava Hilchas Bari Amargel v'Chel Amargel Barim Saw. The halacha is that a Bari Amargel and a Chel Amargel is 40 saw. A Bari L'Ainsa is Tisha Kabin, and a Bari L'Ainsa is somebody who's a Bari who had a mission. He has Tisha Kabin. A Chel L'Ainsa is part of Miklum, but someone's the Chel and had a mission, so such a person will be totally part, doesn't need anything. So it comes out very interesting then. If that's the halacha that quote unquote Rava says that you do require a barim son, you do require tisha kabin and all of this. So how are we ignoring him? We've said before, Rava is the basroi. So all the Mefarshim point out that Rava is the basroi, and normally we would pass like him, but over here we had Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. And what did Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak say? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that we go like Yehudim and Sarah. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is even after Rava, so he's really the basroi, and that's why the Gemara brought him down, because we do not go like Rava. Even though Rava is saying what the halacha is, we ignore what Rava says, and therefore we hold like Yehudim and Sarah. It's a burden on Shulchan Aruch that there's no tisha kabin, even forget tefillas Ezra by a balkari, whether it's l'margil or la'antai. Period. Have a wonderful day.